fictitious identity called Kashmirian. And after that, we saw the exodus of the Adi-Shaivite minority traditions, Kashmiri Hindus, from the 20th of January 1990. Before the exodus, there were 160,000 Hindus in Kashmir. And after the exodus, 4,000 Hindus remain. And today, that number remains extremely low, and Hindus in Kashmir are still in danger. Now, let us really understand this. These pictures, these horrific pictures, are from the massacre of one Dhamma in Kashmir. How can someone kill small children so brutally? Is it because of geographical disputes, because of religious extremism, or because children were not of their fictitious Kashmiri descendancy? Whatever the reason the killer may subscribe to, how can somebody be so evil that they're killing children and justifying it for some reason? And terrorists had given 3 options to Hindus. And these options were either convert, flee, or perish. The message was either converts, leave the land. Political propaganda to justify their persecution was called Kashmiriyat. And the religious propaganda to justify their persecution was to label them as kafir, as a non-believer. Kafir, K-A-F-I-R, means non-believer, and the word became a mechanism for isolation. The Indian media continuously showed it as a local problem of Kashmir for which Hindus of the rest of the world would not even need not bother to look at and see the horrific tragedies and the killings that were ongoing in this area. Now, let us see how in the persecution of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, in exactly the same way as they have been doing for thousands of years, the anti-Hindu militant terrorists had used this tactic of segregation and isolation. First, the segregation and isolation tactic, once again, was the act of isolating from the human family to make him vulnerable and easy to persecute. One of the examples that we see primarily is the physical act of isolation, when the anti-Hindu terrorists had trapped the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism in a hut, had thrown flame bombs on it, and decided to assassinate the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. In some act of eternal compassion, the Supreme Pontiff of continuously isolation attempts and assassination attempts were executed against the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. They had huge volume hate speech, and they made the public image of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism in such a way that nobody wanted to associate with him, or they would themselves be under risk of attack. Even though people wanted to support him, they were unable to. And in this process of alienating, we saw more than 14,000 hours of fabricated lies being spread on the media, false news, hate speech, and particularly the morph video broadcasted from 2010 to 2014. And it had the following effect: effectively executing the strategy for isolating and alienating the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. And because of the vilification done, even if the people wanted to support the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, they were afraid to do so. And it also resulted in physical isolation. Several attempts were made to mob lynch or kill the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, burn him alive, and to protect the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism from being co-victims of such attacks, he has no option other than to go into isolation. The anti-Hindu forces spread huge volume hate speech, and they made the public image of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism that nobody wanted to associate with him. As you can see here, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism with the former President of India, Abdul Kalam, and the current Prime Minister of India, Minister Narendra Modi. And we see that before 2010, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism had established well-respected position and well-respected among even all of the leaders of India. However, due to the amount of hate speech and the volume that was ongoing in the media, everyone was at risk of being attacked and targeted for attack if they are even associated with the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, leaving him in absolutely no choice but to remain in isolation and make him ultimately more vulnerable. Here we can see the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism with prominent leaders and with Pramukh Swami Maharaj, with Pramukh Swamiji. The next slide, please. We also see, yes, the next slide, please. And on the 3rd of March in 2010, several extremist militant forces attacked hundreds of ashrams and centers of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. They targeted centers in more than 40 cities simultaneously and forced them to shut down overnight. This forced the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism to flee his own ashrams and remain isolated from his followers to protect his life. And one of the most devastating acts of segregation and isolation was the 53 days of illegal custody that the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism was forced to undergo. On the 15th of June 2012, 2 years from the act of the crimes done against the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism in 2010, in a single day, 2 false cases were booked against the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, and he was again rearrested illegally without any form of evidence. The disciples, of course, did not know of the second false case and had no clue about where the police were taking the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism after even bail was granted. By isolating the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism from his disciples, the police were able to illegally arrest and violate the basic human rights of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, as well as make him more vulnerable to a mob army, which was armed and so violent. And on the 14th of September in 2014, during the illegal administered medical test or court in 2014, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism was forced into the vulnerable hands of the doctors and police. And this allowed them to attempt to poison the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism and inflict serious damage on the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, which left him unable to walk. Now we're seeing more incidences of segregation and isolation. Here in example of the mob lynching in Palghar in April 2020. In 2020, to justify the murder of sadhus, the media mafia is telling that 3 thieves were killed. But here you can see the sadhus being handed over to the mob by complacent authorities. The next slide, please. And we're now entering into the next step in the 8 stages of Hindu persecution, making it impossible for victim and society to make intelligent, conscious decisions about violence against the victim. And the word Kashmir itself originates from one of the Saptarshis, Rishi Kashyapa. However, the very propaganda to justify the extermination of ancient indigenous Hindu communities of Kashmir was a political ideology named Kashmiriyat. The terrorist masterminds who brought this religious persecution cunningly disguised it as a geographical dispute and freedom struggle. Kashmiri Pandits were called migrants by the mass media cult, and Kashmiri Hindus were treated as refugees in their own country. Their real status remained as a confusion to people outside. Persecution was watched in silence. And now let us understand how in the persecution against the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, this exact methodology was once again used as a strategy. How media had continuously been using the word Swami and entirely twisting the truth of what is going on. Here you can see a Swami was accused of is being in the media told as booked for raping a woman. But if you see, the name is not even Hindu. The next slide, please. And in the persecution against the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, we are seeing how the actual Pontiff of Hinduism made and what the media projected. The actual statement that the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism made in 2010 in the interrogations by the police, he's saying his body is not capable of indulging in any sexual acts, and he can prove so through a medical potency test. And how the media completely twisted it and made this as hate speech against the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. He's saying, in the media, they projected saying, "I am not a man," Nithyananda told CID sleuths. This is how their headlines are exactly the opposite of what the actual statement is being told. And the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism asked the police to conduct a potency test, so the police knew that he was incapable of performing any kind of sexual act, which they were trying to allege him for without any victim in the first place. The next slide, please. The police were expected to investigate the real truth. This was possibility for the world to know that Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism was in fact innocent, absolutely and entirely. The police colluded with the media and destroyed this possibility by presenting it as a subject of ridicule. Now, the average man got confused whether he should trust the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism or not. But they started believing that there must be something wrong or fishy. That was the overall effect of the entire media hate Pontiff of Hinduism. By continuously putting out headlines, first saying, "Yes, it was me," which is an entire lie, and then trying again saying, "That wasn't me in the video," continuously changing the narration. And here we can see exact opposite narration of the same press meet by two different newspapers. Again, program confusion, making it impossible for the society to make conscious decisions about what is right about the victim in the whole persecution. Again, Times of India titled on February 2nd, 2011, and in another newspaper article, the exact opposite. And another example of the same thing. The next slide. And here we're also seeing how the media was trying to spread false news that the head of the Akhada Parishad was against the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, whereas here we see on the truth that the president of the Akhada Parishad was supporting the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism during the Nasik Kumbh Mela in 2015.